the scariest thing that has ever happened to you, paranormal or otherwise? Story 1. I was alone in my apartment, and I decided to take a shower. I locked the door out of habit. It can only be locked and unlocked from the inside. My clean and dirty clothes are thrown on the floor of the bathroom in two separate piles. When I finished taking the shower, my clothes, both dirty and clean, were neatly folded in two separate stacks on the floor. The door was still locked. I take very quick showers. This happened in the span of 5 minutes. I have no explanation, and I get goosebumps just thinking about it. This happened about a week ago, and nothing like it has happened prior or since. I've told this story before, but that was a while ago on my 12th birthday. I was on the way to the bike shop to get a new bike. I was with my dad, his girlfriend, and my brother. We was still about 10 minutes away from the town center, so nowhere near the bike shop. Some random, old, creepy-looking guy came up to us, looked down at me, and said, "You buying a bike?" I looked at my dad, confused and kind of scared. We told him that we were on our way to buy a bike. He then started going on about how I must get a helmet and wear all the time. We was a little freaked out, but we just assumed he was a weirdo and just forgot about it. A few hours later, I was riding through the park on my new bike, and I fell off. It didn't fall very hard and landed on grass, so it was cool. As I went to get up, brush myself off, I looked up, and he was just standing there, looking disappointed and shaking his head. He shook his index finger at me and said, "I told you to wear a helmet." At this point, I just myself and rode as fast as I could home. What is even weirder, though, is the fact that I have moved about 40 to 50 miles away since then, and I still see him every once in a while. I don't believe in guardian angels, but it just creeps me out. Story 2, I was using a hair trimmer down there and nicked my son of a bitch bled a lot for such a tiny little cut. This story scares the out of me every time I think about it. I was at my grandparents' house one night. My grandmother then came into my room at 3:30 in the morning and told me, "Your grandfather needs your help. Get up." This sort of startled me because she has never done anything like this. I go out to where my grandfather is right outside the door that goes into the garage, and he tells me that the garage door just went up and down 6 or 7 times. We need to check it out. I obviously said, "All right," and we went into the garage only to find the pull string that prevents the door from opening, which can only be pulled 4 on the inside, was pulled. He looks at me and says, "We have to go outside to fix it so no one can get in." We then head outside, and when we rounded the corner to look at the garage, the motion lights came on, and there seemed to be scratches on the door. He and I fixed the door and went back to bed. About 2 weeks after this, I was staying there again and woke up at around 2:30 in the morning to hearing stomping in the kitchen, which is very close to my room. I get up and hear the stomps come closer to my door and stop. I figured that my grandfather was adjusting the thermostat. I opened my door to see what was going on, only to find that everyone in the house was asleep and all the lights were turned off. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. A few weeks passed, and I went over there on a weekend because I had nothing better to do. Since it was a weekend, I stayed up rather late and fell asleep watching TV on my bed with my door opened. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and for whatever reason I woke up without any reason. I look around and realize that I have fallen asleep with the TV on. I looked at my door, and at that instance I saw a man-sized figure step out of my doorway and walk down the hall toward the kitchen. I slammed my door and stayed up all night. By this time, I was pretty convinced I had a demon or ghost or something in my grandparents' house. I was just relieved that whatever was in their house wasn't following me. Maybe a month after the last incident happened, I was at my dad's house, and I was about to go to sleep. At my dad's, I am on the other side of the house from everyone. It was maybe 10:30 at night, and I was about to go to sleep. I had laid down, turned my TV off, and was drifting to sleep. Then outside of my door, I heard a combination of stomping and a really low sound. This honestly scared the out of me. I, in all of my infinite wisdom, decided to see what it was. When I opened my door, I saw the same thing that I saw in my grandparents' house. I teared up from fear and left the light on and fitfully tried to sleep. It didn't work well. Maybe a month and a half had passed after the last incident. I was at a friend's house, and he and I cleaned out his shed so we could just hang out in there and smoke his hookah. He usually has a lot of people over to his house, but this night it was just he and I. We were smoking hookah, and we're almost finished. We were just listening to some music, and I was just sitting there listening to the music when all of a sudden a black flash darted underneath my legs. But I didn't feel anything. I started to look around to see if one of his cats came in with us. As I started to look around, I realized that there is no cat in the shed. I start to become afraid on the inside, but trying to keep myself outwardly calm. I look up at my friend, who the look of being close to panic, and all he says to me is, "I think something just ran underneath your legs." At this point, I started freaking out because I didn't say anything about it. He told me that he saw it as well. We both ran out of the shed and went into his house and just watched TV until we calmed down and went to sleep. This was the last time anything like that has happened. This was maybe 3 weeks ago. I saw this question and figured that this could be a good read to someone. TLDR, I have a demon and it's scary. Story 3, the house I grew up in was very strange. My friends did not like to spend the night and said that they had weird dreams there. At night, it often sounded like someone was moving furniture around in the living room. My mom and I would randomly smell cigar smoke when no one in my house smoked. We would catch movement out of the side of our eyes, and nothing was there. Our dogs would suddenly leap up and follow something with their eyes, or would start wagging their tails for not apparent reason. I once had a dream about a man wearing a red plaid shirt with black hair and a mustache leaning on the fence in the backyard. It was so striking that it just stuck with me for about a week before I mentioned it to my mom, and she had experienced a dream about the man in the past. We think that might explain the cigar smell. I was once home by myself and washing dishes when I heard the floor creaking behind me like someone was walking on it. I spun around. No one was there. I went back to washing dishes, and there were a few creaks closer. I turned around and asked whatever was to stop. It did. The most unexplainable thing happened one night when I woke up to a scratching and rustling noise in my room. I thought that someone had broken into the house and was in my room, so I laid still for about 10 minutes as the noise continued. Then music from the music box on my shelf started playing. I flipped over in bed, and no one was there. My bedroom door was closed, and my dog was standing at the other side of the room staring at the bookcase where my music box was. I got out of bed and saw that the drawer had been pulled out, hence the slow, scraping noise, and that it had finally been pulled out enough to trigger the music. It was on a flat surface, so it couldn't have slowly slipped, and it was too high for my dog to reach, even if he had the capability of being able to bother it. My mom said that the people my parents bought the house from was a widowed father with a young daughter. His wife had died from cancer in a home hospice in the house. She said that when I was a baby, she would hear me laughing and babbling when I was alone in my crib, and when she would look in a nursery, I would be looking up at something. For some reason, she felt like it was connected to the woman. Story 4, not paranormal, but spooky is all. I was in high school and still living in my family home in Queensland, Australia. My parents were going away for the weekend, and we had just been broken into the previous week, so I was still feeling a little rattled and specifically asked my sister to make sure she slept at ours that weekend. Of course, I get a text from her at about 11 p.m. on Saturday night, saying she was going to be staying at her friend's, so I put myself to bed feeling a little creeped out and half expecting someone to break through the door at any minute. It takes me ages to get to sleep, but I must have dozed off because the next thing I know, I'm waking up to an intensely loud noise. It takes me a few moments to register that it's music and that it's our stereo blasting at full volume at about 3:00 a.m. Knowing I'm home by myself, I can't figure out why it's on. I know my sister wouldn't come home and turn the stereo on, so I start to panic thinking someone has broken in and turned the stereo on to freak me out. I desperately around my bed in the darkness trying to find my phone, and then realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't take my mobile into the bedroom with me that night, and I can picture it sitting on the kitchen bench where I left it. I must have had a hit of adrenaline at this point, because for some unknown reason, I decide to just go for it. I throw my door open and scream my sister's name, hoping that either she will answer me or the intruder will think multiple people are home and get the out of there. There is no response, but then the music begins to get quieter because the volume is being turned down, although it kind of goes up and down for a bit. I step out into the hallway and then around the corner to the living room. I turn the light on expecting to see someone. There's no one there. I should point out here that our house is 3 split levels, so the rest of the house is in darkness, and there are about 1 million places for someone to hide. I start to take a few steps into the living room and think about whether to run to the bathroom to lock myself in or make a dash down the stairs past the kitchen to grab my mobile and get the out of there. I'm about to make a run for it when I hear the stereo volume decreasing down to a very low volume, and I force myself to glance over in the corner at it. I have to look twice at what I see, thinking I was imagining things a gecko had dropped from the ceiling and landed on the stereo, turning it on with the impact of landing. The buttons for volume and on-off were positioned on top, and the gecko had been running over the stereo, probably startled by the noise, hence why the volume had been turning up and down. I think it took me about an hour to calm down after that, and I went through every room in the house before I could force myself to sleep at about 5 a.m. To this day, I have never gone to sleep without someone in my house. That gecko robbed me of my sleeping innocence. Story 5, my mother was yelling at me to take out the trash at around 10 p.m. Not a big deal. I just forgot to take it out earlier. I get to the trash cans at the side of my house and throw the bags in the bins. Then I feel something tugging at my shorts and try and pull them down. I turn around to see no one there. I then nope the out of there and book it to my room. TLDR, almost got raped by a ghost while trying to take out the trash. Story 6, few years ago, I was in my bed, on my laptop, and covered up with just the sheets pulled away from me, quickly, to the end of the bed. I froze and held my breath for several seconds, trying to hear if anybody was under my bed. First thought was a roommate was with me. Nothing like that ever happened there again. Edit in response to a few common questions. I didn't have any pets or anything. No rats or pests. I closed my laptop, sat still, and held my breath to try and hide in the darkness because my first thought was that a human was literally pulling itself out from underneath my bed. So I thought maybe if I make it super dark and quiet, then when I'm up here, I didn't think it was ghosts or anything supernatural. It just happened quickly and unexpectedly, and I thought I was going to die. Hello? Story 7. When I was a young teen, I had several bouts of sleep paralysis. Of course, back then, I had never heard of this condition, and it scared the living out of me. I was convinced there was a being standing in my doorway, but despite every fiber of my being trying to move, I was unable to turn to look for myself. It seemed to take forever till I was slowly able to regain motor functions, and for a long time, I was convinced it was an alien abduction. Really freaked me out terribly. Story 8. My story doesn't involve anything paranormal, but it was a quality as frightening when it happened to me. I was 10 years old, and it was the day before Mother's Day, and my dad had taken my older sister and I to the mall to get her a present. This was like a weeknight, though, so the mall was pretty dead aside from a bunch of mall rats, as what my dad called them. They were just either really old people that sit on the benches and stare at people or gothic teenagers who have all the piercings and mohawks and stuff. Anyway, the shopping's done, and I have to go to the bathroom. My dad and sister wait on a bench, and I walk through these double doors that opens up to a long corridor and leads to the bathrooms all the way at the end. I walk down and peek inside the bathroom. There are only 2 stalls, but for some reason the main door is propped open. I go in anyway, because I really had to pee. So there I am, sitting on the toilet doing my business when I hear voices coming down the corridor. They sounded like a group of the teenage gothic mall rats. I stand up, flush the toilet, and am about to open the door when I hear one of them come into the bathroom. I freeze because I thought it was weird for a guy coming into a girl's bathroom. There was a moment of complete silence, and then I see a pair of black heavy boots approach my door. Then without hesitation, this guy just starts shaking the door really, really hard and violently, all while making some sort of weird animal-like noises. I sit back down on the toilet and almost start crying because I have no idea what's going on. The guy looks in the cracks in the door, and I can see that he has one of those huge septum rings, and it freaks me out even more. I hear the other guys that are standing in the corridor outside of the bathroom say, "Just grab her leg from underneath." And so this guy starts sticking his hands underneath, trying to grab me, but I pull my legs up on the toilet and start hitting his hand with my little purse. Then he goes into the next stall and tries the same thing. The entire time he's like grunting and making weird sounds. I was so freaked out. I also couldn't speak for some reason. I was like frozen and my mouth couldn't form any words. Then I hear one of them say something about a cop car parked out front. So they all leave through a side exit. I sat on the toilet paralyzed with fear and my squeezed eyes shut for a good 5 minutes, trying to convince myself that it all didn't happen. But when I opened my eyes again, I could see the boot prints on the tiles of floor, and it made me more scared. Finally, my sister comes in asking me why I'm taking so long, and I burst out of the stall, crying my head off and booking it down the corridor and back to my dad. TLDR, I almost got kidnapped by some deranged gothic kids in the bathroom of a mall. Edit paragraphs. Story 9. If you have a limp handshake and want to stop, what I do is tense up my upper arm muscles when going in. It stiffens my hand and provides a firm but not overbearing handshake. Edit, goddammit. Story 10. One night, I want to take my dog for a walk at around 10:30. As soon as we're out of the door, he starts acting really agitated. I figured he just really needed to go. As we walk down the driveway, I hear a rustling from the tree in the neighbor's yard that's a few feet away and see a large dark shape. We ran like to the street as a bear was now climbing down and was between us and the door. It wandered away without incident, and surprisingly my dog still needed to. Story 11. Well, when I was 10 years old, I lived in a house that gave you the creeps, even during the day. I will never forget some of the things I saw or heard in there. It was October of 2003, and the day had been a calm, uneventful one. I had just fallen asleep, and the lights in the house were all out. I remember being shaken from my sleep to the sight of a shadowy figure hanging out on the stairs. Only half of its body was visible. It quickly ducked down, and I heard whispers. "He's still awake. We gotta wait. These entities, spirits, demons, whatever you want to call them, were planning on getting me that night." I quickly started screaming for my mother, who didn't believe me when she came in my room to comfort me. So there I was all alone in my dark room, with 2 entities trying to get me. I tried to go back to sleep, but again was quickly shaken by my feet and saw the 2 figures in the stairwell. I flipped over and covered myself in my blankets, but I felt something breathing on me. The sound of the heavy breathing shook me to the core. I cried for my mother again. She came this time and only told me to not think about them, and they would go away. They never went away. The voices I heard, talking to each other about how they were coming to get me, how they were going to wait till I fell asleep. This is when the music started playing. It sounded like an ice cream truck was coming through, or circus music, but who drives an ice cream truck and sits in front of someone's house at 4 in the morning? I will never forget that night. Being woken up every time I even got close to drifting to sleep, the music, being paralyzed by the fear of getting out of my bed, and what might be waiting for me. I later came to know these figures as the man with the hat and the tall dark figure. There was a third entity that stayed in the basement of the house that my brothers and I all saw at one time or another, crawling up the stairs to the kitchen. Slowly, a part of me wants to go back to that house and face my fears, but in reality, retelling this story brings me down on my knees in fear and uncertainty. Well, Reddit, that's my story. Hope you all enjoyed. I will answer questions if asked. Thanks for your time. Edit, thanks for putting this in paragraphs for me. I was actually too concentrated on telling the story to really consider formatting. Story 12 on the paranormal side of things. I grew up in a house that was years after we moved in found to have a hidden torture chamber behind a false wall in the basement. A lot of unexplained things happened during 14 years we lived there. One that particularly stands out happened when I was in my last year of elementary school. My youngest brother left when my mom went to work, and she would drop him off at preschool. My other siblings all were in junior high or high school, and left earlier than me. As their school started an hour earlier than mine, my father left before everyone, at 5 a.m. every morning for work, so I was always the last one to leave on school days. One of my brothers, who was later diagnosed as bipolar, got into drugs the year before, so my parents put a deadbolt on their room to stop him from taking money things to sell. It was always locked when they left, and this morning was no exception. I left as usual, got about a block and a half away, and realized I'd forgotten my math book. I ran back. I'd been gone 3, maybe 4 minutes, but upon opening the door, so much had changed. My parents' bedroom door was wide open. The stereo hadn't been on when I left. The door beside their dresser, which led to a second-story porch, was also open. Nobody in the room, nobody on the porch. Worse, though, was the door to the attic being open. It was never left open. I peered through the doorway, and halfway up the stairs was our dog. She was a teacup poodle, small and very sweet, but right now she was standing, shaking on the stairs, her teeth bared, emitting a very low growl. I went up as quietly as I could, keeping my eye on the dark blob of shadows at the top of the stairs. I'd just on where I could reach her, when it felt like a breeze hit me, carrying a sickly sweet but rotten smell, not unlike the bottom of a well-used garbage can. There were no open windows in the attic. I reached down to pick up the dog, and when I looked up again, the shadow blob hadn't moved. Scared now, I snatched the dog and ran down the stairs, slamming the door shut. I ran down the other stairs to the first floor, still holding the dog, and out the door I never told anyone about it. When I went home that day, my parents made no mention of their door being open or the stereo on, so I'm guessing the things were set right before they got there. For the rest of that school year, I went to my friend's house every morning to walk to school with her after my siblings left. Story 13. Okay. I live about a mile away from a major airport, so some planes fly over my house while descending. So one night, it's about 1 a.m., I'm asleep, so this plane decides to fly incredibly low over my house. This shakes my house, and I wake up screaming. The plane was also really loud. I'm a bit afraid of planes now. Story 14. When I was 16 and learning how to drive, I had something happen to me that I can't explain and still creeps me out a bit to this day. I was out in a driving school vehicle with a driving instructor. We were probably an hour into the 2-hour session. It wasn't my first time driving, and it wasn't my first time driving with one of the school's instructors, so I was pretty calm and relaxed and pretty much knew what I was doing at this point. Anyway, we're headed down this road and approaching a stop sign. It's still light enough to see what's coming without headlights, so it's not like it's hard to see. I was probably going maybe 35 to 40 miles per hour. It was in a residential area, but on the edge of it, no homes were along the road I was traveling or down the cross street with at the stop sign. It was a 4-way stop because as we approached, I remembered seeing people stopped on the cross street waiting, maybe 200 to 300 yards away from the stop sign. The driving instructor says to me, "Make sure you stop at the sign ahead." I think to myself, why would just remind me to stop at the sign and then say out loud, "Yep," just to humor her and be nice. It's still pretty far away, so it was a pretty odd reminder. The next moment I consciously remember is being on the same road, but being 200 to 300 yards past the stop sign. I don't remember stopping. I don't even know if I did or not. I have no memory of it. We've all had the autopilot thing where you just suddenly realize you're 5 miles down the road on the interstate going 60 miles per hour. But this isn't that kind of experience. Just as my conscious mind picks up and realizes that we're past the stop sign and I have no memory of the past 2 to 3 minutes. The driving instructor turns to me and says, "Did we stop at the sign?" I looked over at her, and we both knew. We didn't even need to say it. We both knew it didn't need to be discussed. Neither of us remembered if we stopped at that stop sign. We don't know what happened for those 2 to 3 minutes. Story 15. I went to the very top of Breckenridge, a part where you have to hike to get to. This was labeled as extreme terrain. Unfortunately, I dropped in where there were too many rocks and boulders to get down. There wasn't much snow that season. I couldn't find a clear path to get down that I could get to, so I did something very stupid and took off my board to try and walk to a place where there was a clear path down. I slipped and slid down like 40 to 50 feet of rocks, boulders, and snow. It really seemed to go in slow motion. It's the only time in my life where I genuinely thought I was going to die. When I reached the bottom, I was surprisingly not hurt at all. It must have been my adrenaline. All I had was a big tear in my jacket and a sore. I was so relieved that I wasn't hurt that I laid down in the snow. Then I heard people saying, "Oh my God," and some just screaming. So I sat back up immediately because I was thinking they probably think I just died. Eventually, I just grabbed my board and snowboarded down the rest of the mountain. I was more embarrassed than anything and pretty grateful I wasn't dead. Hey, race a video of a skier falling off the side of the mountain. It happens about a minute into the video. It is, by the way, but it is an intense video, so some people might not want to watch it. Obviously, I didn't fall off the side of an entire mountain, but this is about what it looked like to me when it was happening, just for a shorter distance than this guy. TLDR, I almost died snowboarding. Story 16 years ago, my parents were out of town, and I had about 9 people over at the time. It was about 9 or 10 p.m., and someone brought over the game prototype. We had all the lights off, and we're just passing the controller around, just messing around before we went out for the night. Everyone was just chilling. All of a sudden, we heard loud footsteps and saw someone get up from the couch and go to the bathroom. We didn't think much of it, just someone go to the bathroom. That's when we all looked around, and everyone was still in the room. Everyone saw it and just looked at each other in shock. No one saw it directly, but from our peripheral view, we all agreed it looked like a Civil War solitaire or something similar that time. We all got up and went down the hall, and it was super cold. Nothing else happened that night, but everyone was freaking out. 3 of them are chicken shits and still will not come over to my house at night anymore. I did some research and found out that there was an old Confederate base not even half a mile away from my house. I don't think that it was really scary, and am not a so-called ghost believe, but it was still cool. TLDR Confederate soldier was just waiting his turn to play prototype and got bored and left. Scared everyone. Story 17, I grew up in a haunted house. I never want to experience any of that again, ever. The scariest thing that I can remember is when I was about 8 or 9. I remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night and heard the noise. Our house was small, and we didn't have any fans going that made any noise, so we could hear everything throughout the house. What I did hear was down the hallway on top of the washing machine. We played board games that night and left them on top of the washer. When I woke up that night, I kept hearing the wheel from the game Life spinning and spinning. I put the blankets over my head and fell asleep that way. Story 18 and probably too late for anyone to read it. But anyway, when I was about 10, I went on summer vacation to the Black Sea with my mom. I couldn't swim back then and never learned after what happened. I was our first day there, and we went out for a swim. My mom got me those inflatable things you put on your arms. The plan was to enjoy the day, and I was excited to learn how to swim. The weather wasn't too great, but the water felt okay. It all changed very fast. We got pulled away from the shore by a rip current, and the sea was about to storm. The waves got higher, and no matter how hard we tried to get back on sand, the sea only pulled us further and further away and to the side. And on the side was a concrete wave breaker. My mom started getting physically tired, and I could see sparks of panic in her eyes. We held to the concrete, and there was no way to get away from the water, and on top of the pier, the waves were getting stronger and stronger. All the people from the beach disappeared. We shouted help, but even if someone was nearby, they wouldn't hear us. The waves were very loud, smashing against concrete underneath the pier, just a couple feet away. Suddenly, a lady appears in the water next to us. We had no idea where she came from. She tells us that there's a ladder on the other side of the pier, and while we're doing our best to hold on to the metal on the side of the pier, she disappears. Again, we didn't see where she went. The waves are at its hardest, and the only way for us to survive is to swim underneath the pier where the waves are hitting the concrete. We had just one chance at it. We patiently wait for a few-second window between the waves, swim under the pier to the other side, and find a ladder. Up to this day, we don't know who the woman was, but she saved our lives, and that day, I decided that I'm going to make sure my life was worth saving. TLDR rip current, storm, concrete, profit. Story 19, this will probably never be seen because the post is already at 2,400 comments, but I swear on my life that it is absolutely true. One of my close friends lived next to a house that was always vacant. It would sell, people would move in, and then one day they'd be gone, and the house would be up for sale again. One summer, when the house was listed again and the last family had moved out, we decided to go take a tour and eat some Jack-in-the-Box we had picked up. We weren't very smart sometimes and thought it would be cool to play chicken with whatever was haunting this house. My friend was really skinny and crawled through the dog door that led straight into the kitchen, then opened the back door for me. We went through all of the rooms, and it was pretty nondescript, Just a typical 50s-style bungalow house with a similar layout to his home, lots of pretty woodwork and built-ins. After we determined that the house really wasn't that creepy after all, we sat down in the dining area, on the floor across from a little horseshoe-shaped nook with a kitchen table and built-in bench. It was dusk out, but the windows didn't have curtains, and it never got that dark in our city anyway. At this point, we had been in the house for maybe 25 minutes, and after we finished eating, we stayed sitting just to hang out and talk since we weren't spooked out at all. All of a sudden, mid-sentence, completely out of nowhere, my vision went black, and I felt this eerie coldness wash all over me and getting chills thinking about it. Feeling so thick, I felt like it penetrated through my body down to my bones. At the very same moment this happened, my friend screamed. I virtually could not see anything and was groping around trying to find something to grab onto, and I felt so unsettled and cold. There's really no other word for it. After what felt like hours, I felt my friend's hands in mine, and he pulled me to my feet and dragged me through the house to the back door. He kept pulling on my arm, and I still couldn't see anything. We got outside, and slowly, you know that feeling when you get a whole body shiver and it runs down your spine. As soon as I was outside, that's what I felt, except this was a whole body shiver that started at the tip of my toes and went all the way up to my scalp, and unexpectedly, and suddenly I could see again, my friend was as pale as a sheet and looked absolutely terrified. I felt off and sort of gross, I guess is the best word, and in shock. I told him that I couldn't see it all until I was outside, that it felt like I'd been enveloped in blackness. He was just staring at me, and I finally asked him why he had screamed. He hugged me and told me that he pulled me out of the house as soon as I started reaching around like I was blind, because a little girl who was completely black and yet see-through crawled out from under the table we were across from and sat on top of me. Story 20, I was at a cabin trip for a weekend with my uncle and his friends. I had just turned 13, and he wanted to take me on a man trip, so they were having beers and relaxing after a good snowboarding session. So I asked him if I could have a beer. He just threw a six-pack at me and said, drink all you want, and I had like 5 beers and started feeling a little dizzy, as I now call it drunk. So I went outside the cabin for it, and it was dark and we were in the middle of the woods with no lights. I started walking in the wrong direction. It was dark and it was snow everywhere. So I couldn't find a cabin. I started panicking and running around the woods for about 20 minutes. I was so off for it, I started crying. After a while, I heard a car coming. I ran out to see if he could drive me back. It was a pickup truck with a weird-looking man in it. He asked me what happened. I told him I was at a red cabin not far from here. He told me to wait in his car while he called the cops. I entered his truck. He took out the keys and locked the car and left. The car was pretty old, so I couldn't open it without keys, and the inside locks were busted. I thought I was going to get killed, and cut into little pieces. The car was filled with mags and beer. I have never been so scared ever. I was in the car for about 15 minutes. Then he came back with my uncle and his friends, opened the car, and let me go. I was so glad to still be alive. The weird guy was just laughing and told me to wait a couple of years with the alcohol and left. My uncle gave me €50 and told me to never say anything about this to my parents.